Discover China. A small city with almost 3,000 years of history and culture sits in northern China. Once known as the economic engine of ancient China, this ancient city boasts being the only city in the country which has retained its original historical design and appearance. Discover China opens the history books to reveal the storied past of ancient Pingyao. On a pleasant summer day, people are going about their daily lives. Sounds echo in the city streets. Life here seems fresh and vivid. The ancient city of Pingyao is located in Shanxi province, deep in the central part of northern China. Since the 1990s, this small town has attracted worldwide attention. The history of this ancient city dates back over 2,000 years. A local legend about the city goes, to resist the invasions of northern nomadic nationalities, General Yin Ji-fu built this ancient city during the Zhou dynasty. Today, near the East City Wall, we can see a temple built 600 years ago to commemorate him. It is said that a tomb exists containing his personal effects, just 300 meters from the East City Wall. But to touch upon the real history, we take a look at the Ming Dynasty period in the 14th century AD. In the early Ming Dynasty, to maintain the hierarchy inherent in the feudal system, major Chinese urban planners were required to construct cities according to standards and designs strictly specified by the centralized authorities. This square-shaped ancient city encompasses an area of about 2.25 square kilometers. A straight axis ran from the South Avenue to the North Avenue along the city center. The city tower measures 18.5 meters and rests dead center in the city. 4 east-west and north-south avenues, 8 well-distributed streets, and 72 alleyways composed a well-ordered traffic network for the small city. Offices and temples covered with golden and green glazed tiles contrasted with brick houses with gray tiles, with the colors and styles representing rank according to the ancient feudal hierarchy. Although the main building and pattern was completed over 600 years ago, this style continues to represent architectural aesthetics and patterns for Chinese people to this day.
所以有机会瑞到希拉，好，梅花样的字句。
Zhao Wei, 44 years old, is a native-born Pingyao resident. When he was 7 or 8 years old, his father appointed someone to teach him how to play the 2-string Chinese fiddle called the erhu. He has since been teaching erhu in the courtyard of his house for years. This has allowed him to survive during the tough economic times. Zhao Wei's 90-year-old father was born into a large family in Pingyao. Over the course of his entire life, he never had to work. Instead, he's been passionately addicted to local operas. The Zhao family has integrated their passion for traditional Chinese opera into their family mansion. Every single wood carving on the door frames of the main houses, carved over 100 years ago, represents a scene from traditional Chinese opera. The courtyard located on Zhongxiang Lane is a typical ancient representation of folk architecture based upon the single courtyard structure model. Traditional architecture of Pingyao adopted the artfully designed courtyard house layout used by the Han people of northern China. Most of these homes consist of 2 or 3 rows of courtyards and lay on an axis. The design and symmetry symbolically represent feudal hierarchy. Legend has it that long and narrow courtyards located in the center of a house were energy points that served to encourage family wealth and vitality. Each courtyard was divided by low brick walls or decorated wooden gates. Traditionally, external walls without windows measured 7 or 8 meters high. This design defends against the dusty weather common to northern China. The whole courtyard encircles a relatively closed space, giving the proprietor a strong sense of security. Most of the courtyards lie north to south to obtain maximum exposure to the sun. Ancient folk houses in Pingyao are characterized by their main houses, which are really adaptations of older cave dwellings of northwest China. These dwellings were built with bricks laid upon the ground, normally consisting of 3 to 5 holes. A wooden ornament was placed along the eaves of the tiled roof, on which various carvings and paintings were placed. These auspicious symbols were also added outside the brick cave dwelling in the hopes of protecting its occupants from extreme weather. Most doors, windows, and partition boards were decorated with more delicate wood carvings. Artisans used more than 10 traditional patterns. The overall effect was to give the occupants inside a cozy yet elegant feeling about their homes. Rich families usually added a brick and wood structure, a sort of an attic on top of the main house. This space was used as a parlor or a study. According to ancient Chinese aesthetic tradition, height symbolized power and wealth. In order to be located higher than their neighbors and to protect auspicious omens placed around the property, various kinds of geomantic walls were built on top of the main house. Among all the ancient folk houses in Pingyao, the Ji family mansion built during the Yuan dynasty is deemed the oldest. Its courtyard is huge but simple in style. Unfortunately, due to the ravages of time, its glory has long faded. Most ordinary folk houses today were built during the Qing dynasty. Since the middle of the Qing dynasty, commerce and industry had been well developed in Pingyao, and many citizens prospered. Scores of large houses owned by merchants and landlords were built inside the city. To date, more than 400 residential courtyard homes dating from the Ming and Qing dynasties remained well preserved in the ancient city of Pingyao. The residents of Pingyao have been enjoying peaceful lives in their city for over 600 years. In the early 1980s, China experienced an unprecedented economic boom. Cities in China began a series of mass reconstructions. All of the ancient and outdated buildings were demolished and replaced by modern square-built streets and skyscrapers. During this time, the sound of ancient buildings being torn down was heard throughout China. People then lacked the cultural understanding of the importance of these landmark buildings. They were labeled as obstacles to the modern city's development plans. The reform also affected the ancient city of Pingyao. A general plan of Pingyao City was designed at that time. According to the plan, ancient folk houses and streets in the city center were scheduled to be demolished in order to form a roundabout. In order to construct several intersecting roadways, 8 big openings would have to be excavated through the ancient city walls. Additionally, a series of tall buildings were also scheduled to be built. This plan would bring certain destruction to the ancient city's architecture. It was scheduled to begin in 1981, but fortunately, the project progressed slowly due to insufficient funds. Meanwhile, Chinese architects acknowledged the situation and called on the government to protect the ancient city. The architects' proposals were ultimately adopted, and the ancient city of Pingyao survived despite its underdeveloped economy over the past several decades. At present, to lead local residents onto the road to prosperity, a new plan issued by the government has adopted a conservation and renovation strategy for the ancient city. This plan is meant to promote tourism. Out of more than 4,000 cities in China, Pingyao can boast being the only one which has retained its historical designs and architecture characteristics of traditional Chinese cities. Hao Zhongming is the owner of this motel. As an ex-military man, he returned to his hometown of Pingyao and bought this ancient house from the government for 160,000 yuan. He spent another 20 to 30,000 yuan to renovate it into a folk house motel. A big event was held to celebrate the opening. In addition to the ceremony, Chinese customs dictate that it was also necessary for Hao to host his relatives and friends who came to feast and congratulate him. Currently, the Hao brothers are running 3 businesses together in the busiest location in Pingyao. This is Hao's brother, Hao Zhongliang. In 1996, he bought the original site of the Baichuan Tong for 480,000 yuan and set up the first private museum in Pingyao. The renovated house dates back to the Qing dynasty. Was an old pawn shop. Nowadays, it is leased by a sock dyeing factory. However, the pollution from the chemical dyes can harm the ancient architecture. Hao Zhongliang was determined to buy it to create a second private museum. The building will house real antiques in order to present an actual scene from an ancient pawn shop.
你看过去这个门窗保存得多好，然后这个到这个今年的年底吧。 就全部完工，还是原汁原味，恢复原来的样子。估计在这个春节期间可以对游人开放。
The Hao brothers' father is turning 85 this year. When he was young, he used to be a peddler. He sold some homemade snacks all around Pingyao. Over the past 20 years, his sons all earned their money in different ways. 8 years ago, they exchanged their former residence for a modern townhouse. The Hao brothers have even bigger plans. They are seizing development opportunities in the ancient city of Pingyao. More than 100 years ago, people in Pingyao developed a management mode similar to a bank loan and called it Piao Hao. This innovation caused the small city to transform itself into a financial center in China at that time. These special weapons were used on the battlefield in ancient China. They were also widely used by men who worked in Biaozhu, or armed escorts. Over 1,000 years ago, a group of strong men who could fight well were armed with these weapons. These men served as armed escorts for couriers delivering money and other valuable treasure. In the early 19th century, Pingyao businessmen paid good money to the Biaozhu for safely delivering goods throughout China. But for various reasons, these couriers often could not ensure 100% safe arrival of money and precious cargo. At that time, the branches of a dye factory in Pingyao extended all over the provinces in the north. Some countrymen requested to deposit their cash in these branches. They knew that they could withdraw their cash from the head office in Pingyao by presenting proof of deposit from the branches. They were only charged a cursory sum in handling fees. As time went by, the amount of revenue generated from handling fees proved to be greater than the earnings generated from the dyeing business. Lei Lutai, the chief executive of the dyeing factory, recognized this banking transaction as a lucrative business opportunity. Although this kind of business has no predecessor, after a few years of preparation, he and others established a monetary management system, creating a new kind of business. In 1823 AD, Lei Lutai suggested to the factory owner Li Dachuan that he change his factory into a piao hao, a bank, calling it Rushengcheng. As principal investor, Li put in several generations of his family's fortune, roughly 300,000 silver taels. Ultimately, the two agreed that the operational and management rights belonged to Lei Lutai. He was also one of its first shareholders. The major customers of Rushengcheng were large enterprises. With a draft or money order, these enterprises could not only transfer their funds safely, but they could also make all kinds of transactions with it. In this innovative way, cash transactions were enacted. Only one draft was held by a customer. The draft could be cashed by anyone presenting it at a piao hao. A series of secret codes were developed from Chinese characters written on the draft, which were decipherable only to key staff members. Rushengcheng pioneered watermark printing techniques on the drafts, which is used to this day. Moreover, to provide adequate time to report a draft's loss, the bank was required to delay payment for 3 to 5 days. Every draft was written and signed by authorized personnel whose handwriting was recognizable by the staff. The codes kept on changing. To date, secret codes composed of Chinese characters remain almost impossible to decipher. The piao hao charged a fee ranging from 2 to 8% of payment charges based on geographical distance. Due to the poor transportation systems in the past, payments all took a long time. The piao hao thus took advantage of the time difference by loaning the amount and charging interest. Today, we cannot discern the profits these methods gain, but we can tell by looking at the large shareholdings of Rushengcheng that the Li family initial investment of 300,000 silver taels, after 100 years, earned a net profit of over 15 million silver taels. Each branch's daily business conditions, along with the head office dealings, were handed over to the counting room. Accountants in the counting room managed all the account statements. There was one chief accountant and one assistant in charge of all the various specialized accounts. Any staff member who had been employed for over a year could be called on at any moment to help with the accounting. This arrangement cleverly avoided recruiting new staff. It also served as a rite of passage for apprentice accountants. Piao hao had a system in place to monitor account statements. The staff charged with this task was called Xinfeng Xian Sheng, Mr. Letters. Mr. Letters were usually scholars. They enjoyed both a high social status and high salaries. Every day, the reports from each branch were presented via letters. The information included daily business conditions, news related to the economy and trade, and even local regulations. Every day, over 100 letters arrived to the head office. The chief executive managed the entire piao hao. He had 1 or 2 assistants. The staff from the counting room reported to the chief executive on the daily management details, mainly income and revenue for each day, including payment charges, loans, deposits, and withdrawals. A Mr. Letters consolidated all the information from the branches and handed it over to the chief executive for decision-making. At the most prosperous era of Rushengcheng, 14 to 15 employees worked in the head office with 3 to 5 in each branch. With a total of 35 branches all over China, Rushengcheng set up a national banking system with only 150 people. Recruitment of the piao hao was very strict. Potential staff had to be 13 to 15 years old and good-looking. All were required to take the abacus and Chinese writing tests and have good references from a fellow countryman. They must come from families with no criminal records for the past 3 generations. After a successful application, Employees received 3 years of room and board, but no salary. After this probationary period, an accounting apprentice still would not get paid directly. The Piaohao would send his salary to his parents. The Piaohao offered lifetime employment. Once the apprentice had grown up, he would be sent to work in different branches. Years later, he was offered some stocks of the company. In fact, 10 chief executives of Reshengcheng started their careers as apprentices. During the Qing dynasty, government officials were being transferred frequently. Facing the need for their wealth to be mobile, these officers soon became loyal customers of Piaohao. As more Piaohaos were set up all over China, even the government relied on their services. Disaster relief funds, taxes, even war reparations were all transferred via Piaohao's drafts from different local governments to the capital, which would then be cashed and sent to the national treasury. There was a customer lounge beside the operation counter of Reshengcheng. A concealed vault sat quietly in this supposedly most unsafe place. In the middle of the 19th century, Piaohao entered into its golden age. Most of the Piaohaos originated from Shanxi province, totaling 40, 22 of which were from Pingyao. If we were to turn back the clock 100 years, we would be able to witness the miracle of wealth created by early bankers of China sweeping into a Piaohao via those tall gray buildings on a short 100-meter-long street. Throughout the history of the Piaohaos, there is no evidence which would indicate that anyone ever tried to use a fake draft or money order. Due to its strict management system, it's very difficult to find a used draft. This is a well-preserved draft, over 100 years old. Fortunately, this draft was preserved due to a clerical error. These are the letters of the Reshengcheng regarding business operations. This account book records some accounts of the Reshengcheng in the 20th year of Emperor Daoguang's reign in 1840. From the late 19th century to the early 20th century, social unrest and turmoil engulfed China. The Piaohao suffered terrible losses. It had missed its opportunity to evolve into a modern banking system. Up until the 1920s, the Piaohao in Pingyao has weakened terribly. A century passed from the first Piaohao, Reshengcheng, to the bankruptcy of Bao Fanglong, the last Piaohao in ancient Pingyao.